In many ways, Nvidia and AMD's strategy for graphics hardware is very different. Despite both producing hardware for desktop as well as mobile, let's just totally ignore things like data center for this video for everyone's sanity. When it comes to AMD, they have also been putting a lot of effort into their APUs. And APUs such as Sarlak and Strix Point are coming along very nicely. It seems that in the case of Sarlak, which is going to be based on an RDNA 3/4 hybrid, RDNA 3.5 if you will, is going to actually be pretty much so performant that any architectures based on, let's say, AMD's own N33 is going to be rendered null and void. And of course, that's not even talking about the consoles. When it comes to the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, Sony and Microsoft went back to AMD. And with the PlayStation 6 eventually coming out, let's say late 2027 or more likely 28, at least according to official documents from Sony and Microsoft during the whole Activision thing, I think it's fair to say that it's very likely AMD are going to be in the running again. The PS5 Pro, you guessed it, RDNA again. But yeah, what about AMD's strategy competing in the highest end performance tiers for the desktop? Will we see an RTX 4090 competitor, or should I say RTX 5090 competitor, for the next generation? Well, in this video, I want to talk to you guys about some very interesting updates that I've been receiving. In my previous information for RDNA 4, I'd said that I'd been hearing that AMD were going with a multi-compute die strategy, multiple GCXs if you will, and that their approach was going to basically allow them a 2x increase in performance over RDNA 3, albeit we're referring to most likely the T-flop performance here. Well, according to what I'm hearing now, this strategy may have changed quite a bit, and so in this video, I want to talk to you guys about AMD's strategy probably going forward, some of the updates I've been hearing about RDNA 4, and I also want to tell you about this sponsor. This video is sponsored by Bzfuture. The EZO Z11 USB mechanical keyboard and the Daru A900 USB and wireless mouse make a fantastic combo for PC gamers who are looking for reliable and great devices at decent prices. The Z11 keyboard is a compact 61-key design available in several switch styles and rated for up to 50 million key presses. The ergonomic design connects via a USB-C connector and comes with a secondary escape and spacebar to swap if you want to bring a bit of variety and colour to the design. You can customize the color with 18 different backlight modes, and you can switch easily between the colors or constant lights with just a few simple key presses. I found the Z11 to be very responsive, lightweight and robust. Despite this being a sponsored video, I can assure you that I will continue to use this as a secondary keyboard for my testing rig, because I regularly test out hardware and so on, so I definitely want to save desk space, and this is perfect for that use. The Daru A900 USB and wireless mouse is great for gamers who are in a hurry. It's a sleek star pattern design weighing just 77 grams with 15 minutes of charge via a 5-volt 1 amp USB-C cable capable of giving you up to 168 hours of battery time. This mouse is capable on average of about 7 days in 2.4G mode or 25 days in Bluetooth. The buttons are robust, rated up to 50 million clicks with a USB with 2.4G wireless technology capable of just 1 millisecond of latency, allowing for snappy, responsive gameplay. Or for those who prefer wired, you can use the bundled USB-C cable, just like any other wired mouse. By using the links below and entering the code RED, you'll gain a further 15% off of the listed prices. RDNA 2 was, in my opinion, one of the best architectures AMD have released in recent memory. AMD and ATI before the acquisition has had a number of hits in the past. The 9700 Pro and other R300 based GPUs were legendary, but despite lower ray tracing performance than Nvidia, RDNA 2 was excellent. It had extra RAM, allowing the titles that are releasing now to flourish still on RX 6000, and frankly cards like the 6700 XT and 6800 XT are really coming into their own right now. Combined with FSR2 and hopefully FSR3 when it finally launches, and we are looking at a really impressive lineup. Radeon competed fantastically with RTX 30, but the question is with RDNA 4, will AMD follow the same path? Will Nvidia have competition for its flagship parts, or is it better to taper expectations? I'd been hearing very early reports of RDNA 4 that we would be looking at twice the performance of N31. Now I want to stress that that was probably T-flops and not raw raster performance, but now I'm starting to think that AMD have changed things. Not only because of some interviews that AMD themselves have put out, but also some other stuff as well that I've been hearing from some sources. I now think it's very possible that they are instead designing a product for the cheaper mass market. And we'll go deeper into this, but let's first of all set things up, talk about things like the release date. Now, I have heard RDNA 4 is released until 2025. Now, I say delayed in air quotes because it's not like AMD themselves, provided a release date. But I had heard it was going to be late 2024, and now it's going to be probably Q1 or Q2 2025. Now, do take that with a grain of salt, because honestly, I've not had enough time to verify this, only with 2 sources, and obviously this stuff can be wrong, but it makes sense for a lot of reasons, not least of which because Nvidia seem to not be releasing RTX 50 until, well, the same kind of date. And this is for multiple reasons, not least of which capacity of 3nm. Now, a big rumour that I'd heard regarding RDNA 4 was that it was going to be segmented into multiple GCXs. Basically, the GCD you can almost think of being split into multiples. Now, the rumours from RTX 50 is it's still going to be a single monolithic design. I've reported this and there have been other murmurs as well. Basically, it's the same design we've seen with RTX 20, 30, 40. Hell, if you really go back, you could say for many generations of product. There are changes, of course. There could be improvements to ray tracing, the CUDA cores, the caches, and all the other stuff. But ultimately, it's still going to be a single chip. In brief summary, I'm now hearing that RDNA 4 is probably not going to be multiple GCXs, and instead it's going to probably be a single GCD, albeit much more performant than RDNA 3. I'll give you guys a brief summary of what I'd heard before, and then we can start to figure out what the differences are based upon the newer information. So, I was informed there were multiple GCXs. There were going to be 3 of them in the case of N41. They basically sat on top of a base die, and this would house things like the display engines. This was a stacked design, and stuff like ROPs, TMUs, and shaders would still be located in the various GCXs. Then, of course, you would also have a number of MCDs, which would provide not only the infinity cache, but they would also obviously act as the memory controllers, so very similar to N31 for the sake of argument. So what have I been hearing differently? Well, let's look at the slides I released previously, just to give you guys an idea of where we were sitting in the past. Now, obviously this information could still be right, or the information could have only been partially right. Some updates, especially for RDNA 3.5, or you could also call it, the RDNA 3.5, whatever you want to say, it basically seems to indicate that some of this stuff was correct regarding RDNA 4, but we'll get more into that in a moment. I'm not going to read out all of these points because there's just too many of them, and some of them just don't really matter too much. But yeah. So the ALU count would be the same for RDNA 4's CU as in RDNA 3. We would still have MCD chiplets, which would act as the cache and memory controller, GDDR7, 50 to 60% performance per watt. I had said that I was less confident about that, but several sources who have been pretty accurate in the past told me that that was the goal again. The GCX, of course, there would be multiple of them, and each one would have 48 compute units. Note that is compute units, not workgroup processors. And this could have changed, so that was a number that they had not settled on at at that time. It's not like these were designs which had taped out. They were still trying to, design this stuff. But the goal at that time was 48 compute units and 3 shader engines per GCX. There would also be improvements in AI and ML. And ray tracing would see significant gains. Now, this does seem to be the case because we've actually seen some patents recently from AMD. In fact, I covered one of them that seemed to indicate that the BVH traversal is no longer being done on shaders. It seems like there's dedicated silicon. Now, whether that actually makes it into the final RDNA 4 design, I do not know, but the patent was an official one from AMD, and I think it was probably for RDNA 4 from what I'm hearing. There were also a number of changes across the caches, L0, Infinity Cache, and so on and so on. And we also, of course, saw things like SALU changes and so on. I'm not going to read out all the stuff, as I said, because again, you can just see it on screen. N41 was going to be 144 compute units. Again, that would be split across 3 GCXs, and that would comprise, depending on how you count them and how you count the ALU, 9216 ALU. And again, I was told that this is a 2 times increase in performance, but most of that would be essentially throughput. It wouldn't necessarily be stuff like, raster performance. Instead, it would be, FP32 and so on. But now I'm hearing that things have probably changed, and the design is much more similar to N31. I am still trying to find out more information about this, but I wanted to talk about this stuff because there have been a lot of updates concerning Zen 5. I've even put out some early Zen 6 stuff, and obviously we've been hearing a crap ton of stuff regarding Sarlak. I've actually got some updates for that as well. And I just wanted to talk about this stuff because obviously, RDNA 4 is like the next big architecture from AMD in terms of graphics. And with all the discussions of what we're going to be seeing with, let's say, the PS5 Pro, I think this now is a good time to tackle this stuff. Now, I don't think the design is identical to N31, and I still have a lot of sketchy details, because I'm still getting some sources who tell me the old info is still right, and some sources are saying that no, they do not think this is the case. They feel that this new info is right. Now, what I have been told is basically there are a number of changes that we could still see in the design. This stuff, again, is not taped out, but there would be numerous improvements to the Infinity Cache, clock frequency, and internal projections are hitting over 3 GHz. Now, the current targets I have for N41, and again, I really want to stress this are not final numbers. The number of compute units and everything else could change significantly. We are still looking at 60 workgroup processors, so this is a fewer number than what they had initially aimed at, which is 120 versus 144, but it's not massively reduced. The clock target, as I said, is over 3 GHz, GDDR7, ray tracing, which supports BVH processing and traversal. Someone had actually told me that this is true, so it does seem like this patent for RDNA 4 was correct. The SALU changes and other things that were spoken about tons of times because of things like Sarlak. Performance targets are up in the air, but they're probably going to be lower than previously. As for the power consumption, 350 to 450 watts. Now, obviously, what changes, apart from the obvious stuff like the GCXs versus the previous slide, I can't give you guys a complete update. But why were multiple GCXs scrapped in favour of this? Well, this is where things get quite complicated. I have multiple times in a couple of different videos now said that I heard that there was at least one redesign of RDNA 4, but these seem to be a new redesign or new changes. I was told, though, basically that AMD's teams just did not like the way that design was becoming more complicated, and it just wasn't going with their internal philosophy. Remember, there have been multiple reports from AMD, actual statements that they want, they don't want to produce a card which is necessarily outperforming Nvidia's flagship. They instead want to make a mainstream offering. Now, if you look at the die size of the GCD in N31, it's basically 300 square millimeters. I'm rounding down a little, but that's on N5. Now, it's not very difficult to imagine that a die which is larger, 350, 400 for example, but based on N3, you could pack in a crap ton of transistors and other tech. Unfortunately, it's not exactly easy to just do a complete comparison, because obviously we don't know all of the architectural changes from one design to another. But what I will say that yeah, this is not the first time that information has changed. Now, if you recall, early on in the whole RDNA 3 thing, there was a lot of mixed reports, and I, along with others, were saying that there were multiple GCDs. There were 2 of them. These basically would hold around 7,000 shaders each, slightly over, for 15,000 shaders total between the 2. I had reported that from several sources, but then one source came out and told me that this is not correct. I then started to double check, do some due diligence, and a couple of other sources said, yeah, actually, we don't think that's right anymore. We think this is misinformation, and we think it's a single GCD. So I put out a video to state that it was a single GCD. I'm going to be honest with you guys, I was kind of crapping myself because I had literally, I pretty much, you know, I'd been pretty certain at that point it was multiple GCDs. And I was like, there's a very good chance I'm going to make myself look like an idiot because I'm not sure which way the wind's blowing, but so many folks were saying it was multiple GCDs. And it turned out it was a single GCD, as we know. What I will say is one of the sources who told me it's a single GCD for N31, it's now telling me it's a single GCD for N41. I also want to give you guys an update for Sarlak. I've spoken a lot about this APU recently, and it seems that some of this information has now been confirmed with database entries from Strix Point, at least the lower end parts, but in a recent video, I also went over a couple of configurations concerning Sarlak. You can see them on screen yourself. The primary difference between the two specs, as you can see, is the CPU core configuration. Basically, they were both Zen 5, but one was 16 cores of Zen 5 and one was 8 cores Zen 5, and the other one being an additional 8 cores of Zen 5 dense. But now, another source has come out and gave me a few updates to this. Now, most of the stuff hasn't changed significantly, but first of all, I'm told that there are no PCIe lanes for dedicated graphics. Of course, there will be PCIe lanes for things like NVMe, but ultimately this is a product which is designed around, let's say, mobile-based solutions. Small form factor, so you're not really going to stick in an RTX 5090 with this for sake of discussion. So not having those lanes makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm told that there will be 3 configurations of Sarlak, and again, Sarlak is the code name for the SKU variant in some ways. You can kind of think of it like saying N31, but not exactly. Now, these configurations could certainly change based upon a lot of different things, not least of which yields and so on and so on. But I was told that there were 3 configurations which are currently being touted internally. 40, 32, and 26 compute units, 8 to 16 CPU cores. Again, these are based on Zen 5. Of course, SMT2 is present, which doesn't really, surprise anyone. The bus width is 192 and 256 bit, depending on the, level of performance we're looking at, with the 192 bit having 24 megabytes of Infinity Cache and 32 megabytes for the 256 bit. I was told that the performance is between the 7600 and 7700, but this is with the highest TDP configuration, which seems to be 120 watts. Finally, 128 gigabytes of capacity for memory is supported, and the memory speed is 6400 to 8533. So obviously that's a crap ton of memory bandwidth, which is obviously designed to feed the beast. Now, again, I know that there is some conflicting information in this video, but I wanted to let you guys know about this because I think it's just better to be, frank and honest if I'm hearing conflicting things rather than just say this is what, just kind of just going with it. I'd rather say I'm uncertain about something and give you guys what I'm hearing rather than just, acting like I'm certain, because I don't think that's intellectually honest, and I know that it could maybe come across as fence-sitting, but I'd rather come across as like I'm uncertain, and then when I feel that I'm more, certain about something, say, actually I think it's leaning in this direction. But obviously if you have multiple sources, and several of them have been really accurate in the past, kind of telling you different things, it becomes, well, a little difficult to know sometimes which way the wind is blowing. So far though, my personal feeling, and this is based upon what I'm hearing now, I could put out a video tomorrow and say that, several sources have given me some internal documents and I don't think this is true. But so far, I think that the most logical and I think the most correct thing is a single GCD, which has got a larger number of workgroup processors. I don't think the multiple GCXs is true. I think it's a single GCD that's just bigger, more performant, has a number of improvements, for example, ray tracing, a new geometry engine. We know the geometry engine is almost certainly true based on what we've seen with Sarlak. The Seilu changes that we've talked about a billion times at this point. There's probably going to be some improvements to the Infinity Cache, which is something I've talked about before. A lot more memory bandwidth. And I think they're probably not going to be going as high performance as the RTX 50 cards. I think AMD and Nvidia's strategy is separate here. And my personal feeling is Nvidia are going to just basically do anything and everything they can to have the highest performing product. Even if that thing just costs $1 billion, obviously I'm just exaggerating here, but even if that product is something that is not going to appeal to the mass market, they want that highest performance product. AMD are much more about having an architecture which scales across multiple different things. So APUs, consoles, laptops, smartphones, whatever. And the discrete GPUs, obviously they want to make money, they want to compete, but they also are looking at things like volume. So my personal opinion, and again, I could change it, I think the single GCD for N41 is correct. In some ways, the GPU and CPU market are kind of, well, just cresting along at this point. The RTX 4090 has been the highest performance graphics card for some time, and it really isn't clear when Nvidia will ever launch the Titan or 4090 Ti. As for the CPUs, well, we've discussed at length, of course, what Intel as well as AMD are doing, and really, even with the Raptor Lake refresh, it just doesn't really matter. I think everyone's really waiting for the next generation of Ryzen processors. It's going to be very interesting, though, to see what AMD's strategy is going forward with their GPUs. Personally speaking, I don't mind AMD facing Nvidia squarely when it comes to mid-range and maybe the higher performance tiers, for example RTX 5070 and possibly the 5080. Ultimately, what I want is competition in those marketplaces, because those are the cards that, you know, people are more likely to spend money on. GPUs are just, well, let's just say expensive, right? And again, AMD focusing on cards like, for example, RX 7600 or whatever, just makes sense in terms of volume. I think it's fair to say that Intel as well as AMD will do everything in their power to push things like iGPUs, and it's going to be very interesting to see what Nvidia does to tackle this. Obviously they can do things in terms of market share because, well, they just have so much of it to try and bully, or should I say convince, system integrators and laptop manufacturers, and it's going to depend a lot on how, for example, Sarlak ends up performing. I'm going to be very excited, to be honest, to see what the next generation of RDNA actually ends up doing. I think for many, AMD having a highest performance tier card is going to be awesome, but as, you know, the company's own executive has said, such as David Wang, it doesn't necessarily equate to the highest sales volume, and I think many gamers just want a card which is not going to be like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of watts, like 600 watts, and the cooler the size of like Manhattan. It's going to be an extremely interesting couple of years, I think, in technology, particularly given the PlayStation 5 Pro does seem to be on the horizon. Given the rumours of the hardware that I've personally been hearing, it's not inconceivable we're looking around a 2 to 2.5 times jump in performance, depending on if you're referring to raster and ray tracing, respectively. And while that certainly is not going to outperform high-end PCs at the time, depending what Sony's strategy is in terms of pricing, it could make a very compelling upgrade option for users who have already been sticking with lower-end PC hardware, or perhaps already have a PS5 and just are thinking, well, I was going to go with PC hardware, but you know what, I can just buy this PS5 Pro and it's the same price as, well, let's just say for the sake of argument, a mid-range graphics card. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this one. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.